Congratulations, you did it. And now, everything is bound to change tomorrow. Somewhere in the last few weeks, maybe even yesterday, you made a quiet decision that the universe wasn't expecting you to make yet, and that one small inner shift sent out a signal that cannot be undone. You might not even realize how powerful that moment was, but it rerouted your path in a way that forces something to end tomorrow, something that was meant to drag on much longer. And now, Neptune going direct tomorrow isn't just an astrological event. It's the moment the universe has to respond to the decision you already made. And that's where things get interesting. There's a version of reality you've been quietly walking away from, even if you never said it out loud. A world built on pretending to be okay, settling for half-truths, and performing the life other people expected from you. You didn't confront it. You simply stopped feeding it. And the moment you did, something in that old world started losing its power over you. Neptune rules illusion, the masks, the false comfort, the smoke we all learn to breathe just to get through life. And tomorrow, the veil over that world finally gives way. Neptune is going direct. The world you silently refused begins to collapse under its own weight. And here's the twist. You don't have to lift a finger. You already made the choice. Reality is simply rearranging itself to match it. And what's coming next is the part nobody talks about. And it's exactly what you need to hear. You may have noticed people acting strange around you lately. More attitude, more tension, more unprovoked disrespect. It's not random. It's a reaction to the energy you carry, the one that most people can feel, but can't explain. Spiritually attuned souls unintentionally expose what others try to hide. Your presence reveals their insecurities, their illusions, their unhealed parts, and when people aren't ready for that, they project it onto you. They think you're judging them or pretending to be above them, when in reality, you're just living in alignment. The truth is, they're uncomfortable because you make them confront themselves. And that's why the attacks feel personal, even when you've done nothing to start them. Light exposes what darkness tries to protect. Your calling, your purpose, your inner growth, all of it attracts resistance. If you've felt targeted, misunderstood, or challenged for no rational reason, it's because you're significant. The enemy never wastes energy on someone who isn't a threat. The enemy doesn't attack what isn't dangerous. You're rising into a version of yourself that can't be controlled the same way anymore, and everything trying to hold onto the old dynamic is reacting to that shift. The pressure is proof you're breaking through, and what happens tomorrow makes that truth undeniable. Tomorrow, most people will wake up and continue moving through life exactly the same, still distracted, still guessing, still wrapped in the fog they've grown comfortable inside. They won't notice anything has shifted because they didn't train their eyes to notice. But you did. While the world stayed entertained and overwhelmed, you were learning how to see in the dark. You were navigating uncertainty with intuition instead of panic. You were choosing clarity before clarity was available. And that's why tomorrow hits differently for you. Neptune going direct removes the illusions, but only those who wanted to see will actually see. Everyone else will keep stumbling through a maze that isn't even real anymore. You, on the other hand, will feel something powerful, a quiet certainty, a sense that the path you've been sensing is finally visible. Because you didn't wait for perfect timing, you aligned yourself with truth while the rest of the world looked away. Clarity appears first to the ones who honored it in the dark. And when the fog lifts tomorrow, you won't be confused. You'll be ready, because what becomes visible next is exactly what you've been preparing for. Neptune going direct doesn't only shift your present, it stirs something much older inside you, something you haven't thought about in years, because life convinced you it wasn't important. Tomorrow marks the beginning of a strange kind of remembering, and it won't come through logic or analysis. It comes through the doorway you shut the moment you decided to grow up. Childhood dreams, visions, stories you told yourself at night, the worlds you created in your mind, all of that begins to resurface in a way that feels too real to ignore. There were moments in your childhood where you imagined a life so wild, so impossible, that you eventually dismissed it as fantasy. But what if those weren't predictions of who you wanted to be, but fragments of who you already were? What if those dreams were pieces of your spiritual blueprint trying to reach you before the world taught you fear, doubt, and limitation? Tomorrow, that doorway opens again. Not all at once, not in a dramatic flash, but slowly, subtly, like a memory that has been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. You thought you imagined it. You thought it was a fantasy. But tomorrow, you'll start to remember that some of your wildest childhood dreams were actually memories from the future trying to reach you. This is why you had an inner knowing that life was bigger than what the adults around you could see. Children don't dream randomly. They dream from the soul state, the version of themselves untouched by conditioning. And because Neptune rules imagination, intuition, and the unseen, its direct motion reactivates the spiritual intelligence you were born with. Think back to the child who believed anything was possible, the child who saw meaning in everything, the child who felt protected by something invisible. That wasn't fantasy, that was alignment before the world pulled you out of yourself. Tomorrow reconnects you to that state. It's the moment the universe hands you back the map you were born with, the one you misplaced when life got loud and complicated. Neptune going direct pulls up the memories from your future self, the hints your childhood self left behind, and the truth your adult self is finally ready to understand. These aren't coincidences, they're reminders, and the biggest one of all is this: your childhood wasn't naive, it was prophetic. Tomorrow, pieces of your original purpose, the part of you that existed before pain, confusion, responsibilities, and survival, start coming back online. Everything you dismissed as imagination might have actually been the truth trying to survive until you were strong enough to claim it. And now that moment is here. There comes a moment in every spiritual journey where the switch flips, not in some dramatic, earth-shaking moment, but quietly, almost effortlessly, like your soul finally exhales after being tight for years. Tomorrow has the potential to be that moment for many of you. The second Neptune moves direct, the fog that's been distorting your inner world starts to dissolve, not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because you finally see things for what they are. And once truth is seen, it can't be unseen. Awakening isn't about knowing everything. It's about no longer lying to yourself. And for many chosen ones, that honesty becomes the turning point that reshapes their entire path. One moment of clarity can dismantle years of spiritual struggle. You've been doing the work, choosing alignment in silence, choosing growth when no one clapped for you, choosing truth even when it was uncomfortable. That's why tomorrow isn't just another date on the calendar. It's the day the universe acknowledges your effort by shifting the landscape around you. People think awakening is this dramatic, cinematic event. In reality, it's the moment the inner light becomes brighter than the outer noise. It's when the narratives you once believed stop controlling you. It's when you finally understand that most of your battles were never between you and the world, they were between you and the illusions you inherited. Neptune, moving direct, acts like a mirror that wipes itself clean. And suddenly, you see yourself without distortion. Light replaces darkness the moment truth is accepted. Not forced, not chased, simply accepted. Tomorrow marks that kind of subtle transformation. Something you've been wrestling with might suddenly stop feeling heavy. A confusion that lingered for months might resolve itself without effort. A fear that felt impossible to overcome might lose its grip. This is what happens when illusions collapse. They stop needing your energy to survive. Awareness is the key to freedom. Not power, not perfection, awareness. When you see clearly, you move differently. You choose differently. You attract differently. Tomorrow invites you into that shift, not by giving you answers, but by removing the lies that block the answers from reaching you. Awakening isn't the end of struggle, but it is the end of confusion. It's the moment the battle changes shape, the moment you stop fighting shadows and start building your actual life. And for the first time in a long time, your path forward won't feel like guesswork, it will feel like recognition. And what you begin to recognize next is something even deeper than awakening itself. When tomorrow arrives, a lot of people are going to feel disoriented, heavy, or emotionally scrambled without really knowing why. But the spiritually attuned, the ones who've been paying attention even when nothing made sense, will feel something entirely different. Not chaos, not confusion, a quiet, almost unbelievable relief. And that feeling won't come from the external shift itself, but from the realization that something inside you has finally completed a cycle you didn't even realize you were moving through. For months, you've been walking through a period that felt like things were slowing down, stalling out, or losing direction. But Neptune's retrograde was never actually about delay. It was about watching what you would do when the environment offered you nothing to hold on to. No signs, no reassurance, no shortcuts. Retrogrades aren't punishments, they're X-rays. They show you who you are when absolutely nothing is being validated or confirmed. And here's the truth most people don't realize. Silence is the universe's favorite testing ground. While you thought you were just surviving a difficult season, you were actually being observed through the lens of trust, patience, and inner sight. Would you keep going without proof? Would you stay aligned without applause? Would you listen to your inner voice, even when the outer world made you question everything? Most people didn't, that's why tomorrow will be confusing for them. They kept waiting for visible evidence before committing to their path. But you kept walking, sometimes slowly, sometimes skeptically. But you didn't break your connection to the unseen. You didn't abandon the inner truth that kept whispering that there was more ahead, even when your life didn't reflect it yet. And now that Neptune is going direct, the gates open for those who didn't give up on what they couldn't see. This is why tomorrow feels like relief, because the pressure was never life punishing you. It was life observing you. You've crossed a threshold where your trust has been proven, your commitment has been anchored, and your inner clarity has become stronger than whatever illusions tried to sway you. Retrograde tested your relationship with the unseen. Neptune direct rewards it. And what it unlocks next is reserved for the ones who kept their inner truth alive in a season designed to extinguish it. One of the biggest misunderstandings in spirituality is the idea that battles end when the enemy weakens. But that's almost never how it works. Most spiritual warfare doesn't stop because darkness retreats. It stops because you become someone darkness can no longer manipulate. You've grown into a level of awareness and strength that old patterns, old temptations, and old fears simply cannot influence the same way. And that shift didn't happen instantly. It built slowly, through every moment you chose honesty over illusion, alignment over convenience, and intuition over noise. A lot of what felt like warfare over the past months wasn't an attack on your life. It was resistance to your evolution. Darkness doesn't fight you because you're weak. It fights you because you're changing. When the light grows, the shadows panic. You've been shedding versions of yourself that were easy to control, and that alone created friction. But you didn't regress. You didn't go back to the familiar storyline you once used to escape discomfort. That is why the cycle ends tomorrow. Breakthroughs never come from defeating something outside of you. They come from breaking the internal agreements that allowed interference in the first place. There were lies you believed without noticing, lies about your worth, your capabilities, your destiny, your timing. And slowly, you stopped believing them. You replaced fear with clarity, hesitation with instinct, doubt with awareness. That inner shift dismantled the architecture of the old battle. Most people expect breakthroughs to be loud. Yours happens quietly. It happens when your internal frequency no longer matches the pattern that once drained you. When you stop feeding the story that made you small. When you stop negotiating with the version of yourself that was meant to expire. The battle ends because the version of you that the enemy targeted doesn't exist anymore. This is the real meaning of tomorrow's shift. The war doesn't end because darkness weakens. It ends because you've evolved beyond the version of yourself who needed to fight. Tomorrow marks the moment where self-awareness overrides fear, where truth dissolves confusion, and where spiritual maturity becomes your default state. The breakthrough wasn't delivered to you, you became it. And once you understand that, the next phase of your path takes on a completely different meaning. For a long time now, many of you have been living with an invisible obstruction, something you could never fully describe, but you felt it every time you tried to move forward. It showed up as situations that almost worked out, opportunities that almost landed, progress that almost solidified. You kept getting close, but something slipped, stalled, or collapsed at the very last moment. And because it wasn't tangible, you blamed yourself, your timing, your luck, your effort. But what you were dealing with wasn't personal failure. It was a spiritual constraint meant to teach you something you didn't realize you were learning. This block wasn't punishment. It wasn't karma in the dramatic sense. It was more like a boundary placed on your path until you grew into the version of yourself who could sustain what you were asking for. Most people never recognize this kind of block for what it is because it doesn't announce itself. It just sits in the background, shaping your timing, shaping your choices, shaping the rhythm of your journey. And for months, maybe even years, it forced you into deeper self-awareness, even when that awareness came through frustration rather than clarity. Tomorrow, that invisible block dissolves, not because Neptune is going direct, but because you've simply outgrown the frequency that required that restraint. Limits fall away the moment you no longer need them. You matured in ways you didn't give yourself credit for. You became more discerning, more grounded, more aligned with your truth. You broke old emotional agreements. You stopped settling. You stopped chasing. You stopped abandoning yourself. Without realizing it, you've been stepping out of the version of you who needed that lesson repeated over and over. And the universe doesn't keep teaching what you've already mastered. The karmic loop ends not with applause or fireworks, but with a quiet certainty that something heavy has lifted. It's not a celebration kind of moment, it's a deep, full-bodied exhale. A recognition, a release, a soft closing of a chapter you didn't realize was finally finished. You might notice that after tomorrow, the resistance you used to feel around certain goals simply isn't there anymore. The friction you once interpreted as failure will feel like it evaporated overnight. But in truth, it wasn't overnight. You earned this shift through every difficult choice, every moment of restraint, every time you held onto your integrity when it would have been easier to fall back into old patterns. This is the kind of ending that only arrives when the soul is ready, not when the mind demands it. And tomorrow, the soul says you're finally ready. What happens after that is not just momentum, it's liberation. Here's the part most people never realize until long after the shift has already happened. You're not in the same timeline as the people who hurt you anymore. The ones who doubted you, dismissed you, manipulated you, or tried to keep you small. They may still exist physically in your world, but energetically, your lives no longer intersect. At some point in your journey, your growth accelerated beyond the timeline where their influence mattered. And even if you didn't notice the moment it happened, tomorrow is when you finally feel the separation. People think timelines are some mystical concept, but really, they're just paths determined by choices, awareness, and frequency. And over the past year, especially during Neptune's retrograde, your choices quietly created a divergence. You stopped responding the way you used to respond. You stopped needing what you used to need. You stopped trying to convince people who were never meant to understand you. You stopped holding onto relationships or identities that drained you. Without realizing it, you stepped out of the emotional dimension where those people held power over you. Their timeline is built on old wounds, old narratives, old illusions. Yours is built on awakening, clarity, and self-respect. The overlap was temporary, and tomorrow marks the formal end of that intersection. Neptune moving direct is just the curtain lifting on a truth that has already been unfolding. Some people can't follow you into the future you're meant to live. This doesn't mean you'll forget them. It doesn't mean their actions were meaningless. It means their relevance dissolves. Their pull fades. Their energy no longer reaches you the same way. Even if they try to provoke you, guilt-trip you, or re-enter your life, the connection won't click anymore. The emotional doorway is closed, and you didn't close it out of anger. You closed it because you finally healed the part of you that kept leaving it open. Tomorrow isn't about losing people. It's about recognizing you're no longer bound to the roles they assigned you. You don't need closure, revenge, explanations, or apologies. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to win. You simply walked into a reality where their influence cannot survive. You're moving on, not symbolically, not theoretically, but energetically. For real this time. And once you feel the difference tomorrow, the future begins to open in ways you couldn't access, while carrying the weight of old timelines that were never meant to be permanent. And what that future holds is something completely different from anything you've lived before. Tomorrow doesn't just mark the end of illusions, it restores something you didn't even realize you had been grieving. There is a part of you, a piece of your spirit, a gift, or inner knowing that life pushed so far down that you convinced yourself it was gone forever. You adapted. You grew around its absence. You learned how to function without it because that's what survival demanded. But deep down, you always felt the shape of that missing piece, even if you couldn't name it. For some, this was a sense of wonder. For others, it was self-belief, imagination, fearlessness, emotional openness, or spiritual authority. It might have been a talent you abandoned because someone convinced you it wasn't practical. It might have been a dream that felt too risky to chase. It might have been a version of you that trusted life instead of anticipating disappointment. Neptune retrograde has a way of burying these parts under layers of confusion, fog, and emotional sediment, not to punish you, but to force you to grow strong enough to hold them again. Tomorrow doesn't just end illusions, it restores what was taken from you. This restoration is not about gaining something new. It's about receiving back something that always belonged to you, but was withheld until you were ready to integrate it. A gift like that can't be returned to someone who still doubts their worth. It can't be handed to someone who still betrays themselves for approval. It can't be entrusted to someone who's still navigating life from spiritual scarcity. The universe allowed that part to go quiet so you could mature into someone who recognizes its value. When Neptune goes direct, it behaves like a tide reversing direction. Everything that drifted too far from shore begins its slow return. Fragments of your purpose resurface, a forgotten passion rekindles, a clarity you haven't felt in years settles back into your awareness. You might feel moments of déjà vu or sudden bursts of inspiration that feel oddly familiar, as if you're reconnecting with a timeline you were always meant to live. This is your soul retrieving what the world tried to bury. Your spirit has compartments that only open under specific conditions, and tomorrow, one of those locks finally clicks open. You may find yourself remembering who you were before life became heavy. Not in a nostalgic way, but in a way that feels like stepping back into the truth of who you were always becoming. That lost piece doesn't return to create more chaos. It returns to complete you. And once that completion begins, the world around you starts to shift in ways that match the person you're finally becoming. One of the most powerful but least talked about effects of Neptune moving direct is the sudden, quiet ending of things that no longer have a spiritual purpose in your life. Some of you will wake up tomorrow and notice that something you've been carrying, something you've been forcing, or something that has been draining you simply stops having momentum. It won't break violently or fall apart dramatically. It will just stop. A thought pattern, a craving, a draining relationship, a situation you kept trying to fix, a habit you couldn't shake, a cycle that has run out of ways to repeat itself. Don't be surprised if something in your life, a situation, a habit, a connection, just suddenly stops tomorrow, without explanation, without drama. This isn't abandonment. It's alignment. Neptune dissolves what doesn't belong, but when it moves direct, it stops dissolving and starts clarifying. This is the moment where your spirit and your path stop negotiating with anything that doesn't match your new frequency. Divine closures don't need theatrics. They don't need long conversations or heavy emotional processing. They slip out of your life the same way illusions do, quietly, effortlessly, without argument. You may notice that a source of stress you've been battling for months suddenly loses importance. You may look at something you thought you wanted and feel nothing. You may realize that the emotional tug someone had on you isn't there anymore. If you're still watching, I'd like to thank you for your attention. If you enjoyed the content and want to see more, please consider clicking the subscribe button. Your support is very appreciated. Feel free to share your experiences or thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, take care and subscribe for more insightful content.